Blood and insectoid gut splashed across the view screen of the ESS Valiant. Captain Zack Ryder grimly watched the Zorgon slaughter Aeron civilians in a surprise attack on their defenseless home world. The other galactic species called humans bloodthirsty warmongers, but as the only ones willing to stop this massacre, humans would just have to own that title with pride. Earth Command, the Ivorians need our help. Request permission to engage, Zack barked over comms. Negative, Captain. We're not getting involved. Maintain position, his superior replied coldly. Zack slammed a fist on the console. Memories of the Kelak invasion of Earth decades ago flashed through his mind, the horrific losses, the brutal retaliation that saved humanity but earned them a reputation as unpredictable aggressors. To hell with our orders, Zack growled to his crew of 150. Set course for Aoria, maximum thrust. The Valiant's engines roared to life. They had to reach the Aeron in time. Zack would prove humans could be a force for good in the galaxy, or die trying. The Valiant hurtled into warp, charging toward the distant conflict, toward order, a chance for humans to show they were more than the bloodthirsty savages the other species believed them to be. The view of Aoria from orbit was gut-wrenching. Zack's eyes widened as he took in the extent of the destruction. Smoke billowed from countless fires that raged across the planet's surface. Craters pockmarked the once vibrant cities, now reduced to piles of twisted metal and rubble. The Zorgon fleet, a swarm of menacing ships, hung in low orbit like a cloud of locusts. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Commander Olivia Chen, Zack's second in command. "We're too late." Zack clenched his jaw. "No. There have to be survivors. We're going to save as many as we can." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the bridge. "Captain, incoming fighters," shouted Ensign Mikhail Petro from the tactical station. A squadron of Zorgon fighters screamed toward the Valiant, their plasma cannons glowing with deadly intent. Zack snapped into action. Evasive maneuvers. "Petro, target those bastards and fire at will." The Valiant's engines flared as the ship banked hard to starboard. The human vessel's advanced point defense lasers swiveled and locked onto the approaching fighters. Rapid-fire bursts of energy lanced out, slicing through the Zorgon ships like a hot knife through butter. The fighters exploded in brilliant fireballs, their wreckage tumbling into the void. Zack wasted no time. "CS, open a channel to the Ivorian leadership." The view screen flickered, and the face of a weary Ivorian appeared, High Chancellor Zelta. Insectoid features were marred by soot and blood. "Who are you?" he demanded, his mandibles clicking with suspicion. "I'm Captain Zack Ryder of the Earthship Valiant. We're here to help. We can evacuate your people, get them to safety." Zelta's compound eyes narrowed. "Why should we trust you, human? Your kind are known as warmongers." Zack leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Chancellor, I know our reputation, but right now, we're the only ones who can save your people. Please, let us help." The Aeron leader hesitated, his antennae twitching. Another explosion rocked his location, and screams echoed in the background. Zelta's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Very well, Captain. We have no choice. We will gather our survivors at these coordinates." Zack nodded grimly. "We'll be there." Valiant out. As the view screen went blank, Zack turned to his crew. "Prep the drop ships and alert the Marines. We're going in." Minutes later, Zack led a team of heavily armed Marines into the heart of the devastation. The Valiant hovered overhead, its weapons primed to provide air support. The humans quickly established a defensive perimeter around the evacuation site, where terrified Ivorians huddled in the ruins. Plasma fire rained down from above as the Zorgon launched another wave of attacks. Zack ducked behind a shattered wall, his pulse rifle thrumming in his hands. "Hold the line," he shouted over the din of battle. "We've got to buy time for the civilians." The Marines and Aeron warriors fought side by side, their weapons blazing as they repelled the relentless Zorgon assault. Zack moved among his troops, his leadership and tactical skills shining through as he directed the defense. An Aeron warrior fell, struck by a plasma bolt. Zack rushed to his side and dragged him to cover, applying pressure to the wound. The warrior looked up at him, surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, human," he rasped. Zack clasped the Aaron's shoulder. "We're in this together, my friend. We'll get your people out of here." As the battle raged on, the humans and Aaron forged an unlikely bond, united in their desperate fight for survival. Zack's bravery and selflessness did not go unnoticed, and the Ivorian warriors began to see the humans in a new light. The evacuation proceeded slowly but steadily, drop ships ferrying the wounded and civilians to the safety of the Valiant. Zack and his Marines held the line, their determination and skill keeping the Zorgons at bay. As the evacuation proceeded, the battle raged on. Zack and his Marines fought alongside the Ivorian warriors, their weapons blazing as they held the line against the relentless Zorgon onslaught. Drop ships ferried civilians and wounded to the safety of the Valiant, while the human ship provided air support, its advanced weapon systems keeping the Zorgon fighters at bay. Suddenly, a massive shadow loomed over the battlefield. Zack looked up, his eyes widening in horror as a colossal Zorgon mothership descended from the clouds. The behemoth dwarfed the Valiant, its hull bristling with weapons and launch bays. "Captain, we've got incoming." Olivia's voice crackled over the comms. Hundreds of fighters and troop transports launching from the mothership. Zack gritted his teeth. The Valiant was heavily outgunned, and he knew they wouldn't be able to hold out much longer against the overwhelming force. His mind raced, searching for a solution. Then, a desperate idea formed. "Olivia, plot a collision course with the mothership," Zack ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We're going to ram it." There was a moment of stunned silence over the comms. "Sir, you sure?" Olivia asked, her voice laced with concern. "It's our only chance," Zack replied grimly. "We have to disable its main weapons and buy time for the remaining Aaron to escape." "Understood, Captain." "Plotting course now." The Valiant's engines roared as the ship accelerated toward the Zorgon mothership. Zack braced himself, his hands gripping the armrests of his command chair. The bridge crew worked frantically, their faces tense with concentration. The mothership grew larger in the view screen, its hull filling the screen. Zack held his breath, watching as the distance closed rapidly. The Valiant shuddered as Zorgon weapons fire impacted its shields, alarms blaring throughout the ship. With a deafening crash, the Valiant slammed into the mothership's hull, metal screeching against metal as the two behemoths collided. Consoles exploded on the bridge, showering the crew with sparks. Zack was thrown from his chair, his head slamming against a bulkhead. Pain exploded behind his eyes, and he tasted blood in his mouth. Struggling to his feet, Zack surveyed the damage. The Valiant had taken heavy damage, but the gamble had paid off. The mothership's main weapons were disabled, its hull breached in several places. "Olivia, status report," Zack croaked, wiping blood from his brow. "We're still operational, Captain, but barely," Olivia replied, her face streaked with soot. "The mothership's main weapons are off, but it's launching more troops." Zack nodded, his mind already formulating a new plan. "Prep a boarding party. We're going to sabotage the mothership's reactor." Minutes later, Zack led a team of Marines through the gaping hole in the mothership's hull. The interior was a maze of dark corridors and pulsing conduits, the air thick with the stench of ozone and burnt circuitry. As they made their way deeper into the ship, Zorgon soldiers appeared from every direction, their weapons spitting plasma. Zack and his team fought back, their pulse rifles lighting up the gloom with each burst of fire. The confined spaces of the mothership turned the battle into a brutal close-quarters firefight, with no room for error or retreat. Zack pressed forward, his body aching from the collision and the exertion of combat. They had to reach the reactor, no matter the cost. The fate of the Aarons depended on it. Finally, they reached the reactor room, a cavernous chamber filled with pulsing energy conduits and humming machinery. Zack and his team quickly set to work, planting explosives at key structural points. Sweat poured down Zack's face as he armed the charges, his fingers flying over the detonator keypad. Just as they were about to make their escape, a fresh wave of Zorgon soldiers poured into the room, cutting off their exit. Plasma bolts filled the air, and several of Zack's Marines fell, their armor smoking from the deadly impacts. Zack ducked behind a console, his heart pounding in his chest. They were trapped, outnumbered, and outgunned. With no other options left, Zack made a split-second decision. He grabbed the detonator and shouted to his remaining men. "Get out of here. I'll hold them off." "Sir, we can't just leave you," protested Sergeant Ramirez, his voice thick with emotion. "That's an order, Marine." Zack snapped, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Go. I'll cover your retreat." Reluctantly, Ramirez and the surviving Marines retreated, fighting their way back through the corridors. Zack stayed behind, his pulse rifle spitting fire as he covered their escape. He knew his time was running out. The charges were set, and the reactor would blow at any moment. With one final glance at the detonator, Zack pressed the trigger. The reactor room was consumed in a blinding explosion of light and sound. The shockwave tore through the mothership, ripping it apart from within. On the surface of Aoria, the remaining Aeran and human forces watched as the Zorgon mothership disintegrated in a massive fireball, its debris raining down on the planet below. The Valiant, though heavily damaged, managed to limp away from the blast, carrying the last of the evacuated civilians to safety. Zack's sacrifice had not been in vain. The Aeran were saved, and the Zorgon threat was dealt a devastating blow. As the Valiant left Aeorian space, the survivors on board mourned their fallen captain. But they also knew that Zack Ryder had changed the course of history that day. Humans were no longer seen as mere warmongers but as protectors, willing to lay down their lives for those in need. The legend of Captain Zack Ryder would live on, a symbol of hope and redemption in a galaxy scarred by war.